What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Tonight, we're sitting down with David Fitzgerald, who's got a new 3-volume book, or well, books that just recently got released this past Monday. And I had some, I guess, input on. I mean, I think that you included a quote for me about the book in at least one of the books. So I don't know, David, do you want to talk about like yourself, like as an author, as you know, and in the community and everything like that?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I always love being on this show, and it's great to see you.
Yeah,
Um,
you too.
so my name's Dave Fitzgerald. For those of you who don't know me, I'm probably best known for a book I wrote in 2010 called "Nailed: 10 Christian Myths That Show Jesus Never Existed at All." And I followed that up a little later with a book on the Mormons, and then a book on uh, more of, about Jesus mythicism called Jesus Mything in Action. This book, this new book is called Playing God, an Evolutionary History of World Religion. And in some ways, it's completely different from the other books. In other ways, it's like the culmination of all of the other Jesus myth, Jesus mythicism books that I've written. This book talks about, well, let me back up just a smidge. So Nailed talked about like the top 10 ways that the official story of Jesus just doesn't pan out when you look closely at it. These are the ways that it just fails. And it makes the argument that in all likelihood, Jesus didn't exist at all. And I don't mean that as any kind of hyperbole. I really think he didn't exist, full stop. When that book came out in 2010, the thing that surprised me was not that the Christians all hated it, because what else are they going to say? But how many atheists raised their flags? Oh no, this is like craziness. This is like Holocaust denial, moon landing denial. They lumped it in with all those other tinfoil ideas. And so I came out with a book called Jesus Mything in Action, another 3-volume book. It's a problem I have about setting out to write one book, and they turn into 3 books. And it talked about all the evidence we have for Jesus in the Gospels themselves, in the New Testament, and outside the Bible completely, just in the historical record. And making the argument again that, yeah, it looks like we are barking up the wrong tree when we try to look for the real Jesus, the historical Jesus, because by all appearances, it seems like he was completely imaginary right out of the box. So, flash forward to now, over the past 20 plus years that I've been talking about them being no Jesus, one of the interesting side effects of that is having Buddhists come up to me and saying, you know, it's funny, we're having the same debates in our circles about whether the Buddha really existed or not. And having ex-Muslims come up to me and say, you know, it's funny, we're having the same debate in our circles about whether Muhammad existed or not. And that is something that's been sticking in my mind for a while now. I did so because, in fact, I was working on my book about sex, violence, sex, the weird-ass morality of the Bible, because of all the developments we've had just in both the Old Testament studies and in Islamic origins. And much the conventional knowledge has come to the fore. We should just talk about the books, I guess.
Yeah, but no. So it really interesting. The first 3 books, the Jesus Mything and Action books, I was actually able to help with the cover art, like on the books for that, and I was really excited about being able to do that. I'm pretty proud of being able to get that out for you. And but these 3 books, you know, you gave me kind of an advanced copy, like PDF copy, and I was able to read through it. And it just, all of it's fantastic. Starting off with the first volume, though, we're kind of going through the evolution of religion, and the entire past of religion. Do you want to talk about maybe that a little bit, because like there's just so much information in all three volumes. But the first volume was like kind of a lot of new information. The first volume and like the third volume, obviously, because I don't have a lot of experience with like Islamic apologetics, other than what is mixed in with Christian apologetics and all that kind of stuff. So, do you want to talk about kind of the evolution of religion?
Yeah, let's go by them one by one, because it is pretty interesting stuff. So the first book is kind of in two parts, actually in two parts. First one's called The Evolution of God, and the second part's called The Gods of Monotheism. And what the first part sets out to do is it goes through all the evolutionary stages that we can identify throughout time, from prehistory to early man to tribal to shamans to chieftains to kingdoms and to empires, and just all these sociological stages, and how religion changes once your society reaches these certain thresholds. And in a nutshell, the more inclusive and bigger that your society is, and the more cosmopolitan it is, the more likely you are, first of all, to start a pantheon, because you've got your god, your neighbor's got their god. If you don't smite each other, and you actually develop trade routes or political alliances, then it makes sense for your gods to be related to each other or become part of the same team, or to say, oh yeah, you worship the sun, we should worship the sun. We're really worshiping the same God, just by different names. And the more this process continues and starts accumulating different cultures, different languages, different peoples under, say, an empire, the more you see the tendency for the religions there to be sponsored by the government and sanctioned by the government, and the gods that they worship to be more transcendent and universal and all-encompassing. It's not just, oh, we've got a river god and you've got a hill god and you've got a mountain god. No, you've got the God of everything, and he loves everybody, no matter what language you speak or where you are, as long as you're in the empire. In fact, everybody loves everybody, so everybody should be in the empire. That's kind of the mindset that was going on back then. And it's interesting to see, like, at the earliest stages in human history, there is no such thing as religion. People believe, yeah, sure, that this big ball in the sky is a god, and the moon and this ocean, and you name it, everything is a god, but they don't worship them. There's no middleman between them. There's no praying to them. Maybe there's rules you have to follow, but there's not that kind of relationship that we see later. Once you get somebody like a shaman who can say, oh yeah, I'll be the emissary between the gods and you, and if you're sick, I'll make you better. If you need help, I'll put in a call to the right guy, and if you need somebody cursed, I'll take care of that too. And when you get shamans, when they become the chieftain, or if they join up with the chieftain, or if they become the chieftain, then religion gets more and more scary, for one thing. But you can see the development, you see the evolution of these things. So it's kind of fascinating to just trace it step by step. The second part of that book is The Gods of Monotheism. And the reason I call it that is because we tend to think of monotheism the way we used to think about evolutions, like starts with a monkey, and then it becomes a chimp, and then it comes a hooded over ape, and then it becomes a caveman, then it becomes a man. And we know now it's not such a straight line with religions either. There's monotheism and polytheism and all these in-between stages of that. And they don't necessarily follow from simplest, from one to the other. They zigzag, and I talk about that process, and especially about how Yahweh became the number one God in our world, in our timeline, if you will. But there were all these other gods who could have also been the one true God that we worship today. And I talk about all those other gods that gave Yahweh a run for his money. So that's book one.
Yeah, well, a quick question. It's often said, like on, I guess, social media, or in the community, I guess, that religion was created to explain things we didn't understand.
Yeah.
Do you, after writing this first volume of your book series here, would you say that that's accurate, or do you have a more complex idea
Well,
of it?
it is both. It is accurate, and there's more to it, because one of the debates that goes on in the study of comparative religions is you've got a group of scholars who say religion is bad. It's a power grab, and it abuses the people, and it props up the ruling elite. And then you have another side that says, "Oh, no, religion provides these services, and there's benefits that it applies to the everyday people." And with all this back and forth, I mean, the answer really, of course, is the most successful ones are the ones who do both at the same time. And I give examples of that in the book as well. If you don't have a power structure supporting your religion, if not actually creating your religion and fostering it, and you don't have it giving benefits to people, it's not going to survive. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Best do both. So anything you can say about religion, good and bad, is probably right on the money. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Another question I had as I was reading this first volume is the whole fact that the state and religion sort of being very deeply coupled seemed to start from a very early
Yeah.
age
Yeah.
as far as human civilization goes. I'm wondering, do you there's this popular argument by like pseudo historians out there that like Judaism came up with this whole idea of separation of church and state, which I guess maybe this gets it more into maybe the second volume. Maybe this is a good
Yeah.
segue, but
Yeah.
I know that as far as your first volume goes here, you made a pretty substantial fact based case that religion was very deeply entwined with the state in these very early sort of simple types of civilizations, and I guess my question is that do you think that the evolution of religion as far as it mixes in with society, do you think that it's always been such a linear progression of mix with the state and then has diverged from the state now, or do you think that there's a different explanation there?
Well, I think like anything else in evolution, it's always wiggier than we suspect. And like the deeper you go, the more you see all these roots going out in all these different directions you don't expect. And they all are going towards the future in different ways that aren't necessarily well thought out uh, or according to some plan or something. That's religion tends to just go and fill theological vacuums the way life does in ecological vacuums. Um, the question is, when we look at our top 10 major world religions who are top of the heap now, where did they come from and what brought them there? And we can trace that out really effectively now. I'm sure we've got loads of more questions to be answered, but it really is remarkable to me that we know as much as we do and we can see the progression the way it is. I'm not sure if that answered the question or just complicated the question more.
No, I think that was good. And there's I'm a very slow reader, so I haven't thoroughly read all of the volumes. But as far as the evolution of God and I guess this very beginning part of religion goes, I felt like I was learning a lot in this first volume, and I feel like a lot of this isn't really, I guess, known by the wider public unless you're actually I guess doing this for like school, or like you're an
Right,
anthropologist or
right.
something like that.
Yeah.
What would you say is like the biggest takeaway that people should have from this first volume of your
Gotcha.
book series?
Well, before I forget, I want to say, first of all, please don't think that these are my ideas or my research or
Oh,
yeah, this is more like a survey of all the recent changes in the consensus over time. And it's a very exciting time. It has been an exciting time in religious studies ever since the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and even more recently with the mythicism historicist debate. There's just some really exciting, interesting discoveries that have been coming out. The most recent came out about 18 months ago from Jonathan Adler, this Tel Aviv archaeologist, who explains that we don't have any archaeological evidence for Judaism before about the 2nd or 3rd century BCE, which blows my mind. That's the kind of thing that made me want to run out and write this book, is because there's so much scholarship and information that's coming out right now that is just mind-blowing, especially to Judaism, Christianity, especially to Islam, but even so with Buddhism and all the Eastern religions. My focus has always been on Western religion and Christianity in particular. So I went really outside my comfort zone to do the research on this, but it's blown my mind. I just am so excited about all the historians who are weighing in on this and coming up with stuff that, a lot of it is stuff that's been known for a long time, but they haven't put it in the right context. So I'll just give you an example of that. So Russell Gamerkin is a scholar who's been studying the Old Testament and in particular the Moses story and other aspects of the Old Testament study. It's been known for a long time that there's other stories of Moses that they've always taken to be a Greek copy of the Jewish scriptures, or an Egyptian or Babylonian copy of this Jewish scripture. And he's saying, well, no, we actually don't have any evidence for our Moses until after these ones show up. So our Moses, the guy we think of as Moses, is like the 4th Moses in the historical record. And he's based off of this character, which was based off of this character. It just blows my mind. Just blows my mind.
So, and I mean, I guess this is more leading into the 2nd volume that we can kind of get to here in a second, but I know that there are some scholars out there that feel like there is a historical Moses behind the stories of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. But what do you think?
Well, this consensus has gone the other direction, and that's been true since about the 90s. That there was no Moses, there was no Exodus, and I honestly, I think we're at the point where it's undeniable, but that's the case, and everything we think we know about the history of Judah and Israel, none of it that comes from the Bible is reliable. The Bible starts out with just pure myth, with Adam and Eve and Eden and Noah and the Ark and the Tower of Babel, and then it gets into legendary stories about Abraham. Everybody from Abraham to Moses to Joshua to the Judges to David and Solomon, those figures all look like they're completely legendary. We don't have archaeological evidence to support them. The evidence we do have for some of them is so sad and small, and worst of all, it's not even conclusive. And yet it seems like we don't get real biblical history until about the 7th century. And ironically, it's people like Jezebel and her husband who we have on better archaeological standing than just about anybody else in the Bible. And of course, we don't get their side of the story. We only get the Bible's version of that. Hezekiah, I mean, most people, if you say who Hezekiah, they'd say, I don't know who's Hezekiah. That's one of the only real figures that we have in the Old Testament. And again, we're seeing his side of the story. When we look at the Assyrian accounts of the story, they have a lot more information. They have the archaeology to back it up, and it tells about the opposite of what the Bible tells us about Hezekiah, for instance. And so we get myth, we get legends, and we get political propaganda. And that's our Old Testament.
What would you say to somebody that, highlights some very specific parts of the Old Testament and then proclaim, the Old Testament to be historically accurate? Like, I'm thinking King David or whatever.
Yeah, it's adorable, really. And I talk about, especially because King David is so vaunted as, oh yeah, no, this really happened. And it's like, dude, the evidence we have for him fits in a shoebox, and there's no smoking guns in there to say, oh yes, there was a King David and a kingdom. And archaeologically, we got nothing at all. It's if there was a David or a Saul or a Solomon, they were nothing like the picture we have in the Bible. We really don't have anything we can really hang a hook on until 100 years after Solomon.
Okay. Now, is this what primarily the volume 2 is discussing, kind of like the history of Judaism and everything like that, or do you speak about like
Yeah,
other
it
things
basically,
concerning Judaism?
right. It spends a lot of time just going through some of the major people that we love in the Bible and saying, were these people real or not? It gets just about everybody, of all the big ones that we love. Yeah. And then does the same to a lesser extent for Christianity. Mostly I focus on Jesus and John the Baptist and the apostles.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I would probably be like way more familiar with the Christianity and the Judaism part, like
Yeah.
of volume 2. Well, I mean, that's what volume 2 is about.
Yeah.
So do you dive into like the mythicism surrounding like Moses and all the patriarchs in
Big time.
that, I'm guessing?
Big
Yeah.
time. And it's really fascinating to see what archaeological evidence we do have for those figures and what we don't have. And like Samson, for instance, there's all these little known facts about Samson that are hiding there right in plain sight on the pages of our Bibles, but they don't give you context. And it's like, oh yeah, this town where Samson's supposedly from is also was the center of the sun god cult. Oh, and his name Samson comes from this sun god name, and it's like everything about him is mythical. He's basically a Jewish Hercules, and yeah.
Was Samson the one that tied the foxes? Were they foxes? They tied their
Yes,
tails together and had them run out.
300 of them tied torches together. It's like I have a footnote in it that says, picture the logistics of any given part of this scenario where he captures single-handedly 300 foxes, ties their tails together, puts torches in them, and sends them off into the fields of the Philistines. Yeah, it's just goofy and ridiculous. And plus, the other thing about Samson is he spends his time doing Conan the Barbarian things. He doesn't. It says, oh, he judged Israel. You don't see him judging Israel whatsoever. You see him whoring and killing people and murdering people and stealing from them, but you don't see him weighing out justice. And it's really hilarious, actually.
So was there anything
the stories that made the cut? Oh my God, I can't imagine if we ever find a load of early Samson stories that didn't make the cut to become holy scripture.
Yeah. Were there any like real historical figures that you found, like as far as the Old Testament goes, and anything in the Old Testament that seemed to match up with other history?
Well, here's the thing. It seems like the further we go back, when you get into like the patriarchs, Abraham and Lot, all those guys, his son Isaac, all those guys, they don't appear to have originally been part of the same story. They were maybe gods or ancestor figures of different tribes, and it's not always consistent where they were from or where the 12 tribes came from. That idea came much later, in fact. There's an airplane going by. So most of them, there might be some of the prophets. Maybe they were real people. Like somebody was asking me the other day if Isaiah was real, and says, "Well, for starters, we have 3 of them, and so like, take 2/3 of what Isaiah wrote, and it's a forgery." And same thing with people like Jeremiah and others. So it gets really sticky when we try to see who's real and who's not in the Old Testament. And another part of that is even just our depiction of the Old Testament, of the setting of the Old Testament, is problematic, because there was never a conquest of the Holy Land. There was never an exodus out of it and back into it. There was never a united monarchy. And these are things that people have taken for granted, even today, even among probably the majority of biblical historians. And yet, one by one, those building blocks have been starting to fall to where secular historians don't think they're true at all. And even, if you went to a religious affiliated biblical historian and asked about Adam and Eve or Noah, they would probably just kind of hem and haw and say, well, let's start with Abraham. And that's generally where they pick up the discussion. But yeah, none of those guys are on any better footing, and it seems like they were all put together in a Jewish context, in a Judean context, as part of one big historical epic, much later.
Now, considering your past work in researching Christianity and I guess I'm assuming Judaism with that, was there anything in this particular section that surprised you in while researching for it?
Constantly.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's like those paleontologists. It's like all the major paleontological discoveries now aren't from people out in Wyoming and Arizona digging the field. They're from guys in the museum realizing that this bone over here and this bone over here that we've had in the collection all along belong to the same dinosaur. It's that kind of thing, because you'll go through like Christian reference books and you'll see them tell you things that like mind-blowingly mind-wrecking facts, and then they'll say something like, but despite that, of course, blah 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 blah, this, and they just sweep it under the carpet right in front of your eyes. And then there's historians like Lester Grabb, who in Christian reference works, he'll talk about like the Ezra and Nehemiah story and then proceed to point out how ridiculous they are. And it's hysterical. It's so funny when you hear the context given from these historians pointing out just how ridiculous these stories are. Yeah, constant surprises constantly throughout the process of writing books.
Now, I'm kind of curious because, we're getting into Judaism, Christianity and all that. Was your intended audience like the more secular kind of crowd, or are you hoping that more religious people will pick this up and learn something about their own faith?
The beauty of this book is, I write it for atheists because I write all my books for atheists. But if you're a Christian interested in the problems with Islam, if you're a Jew interested in the problems with Christianity, if you're a Hindu, whichever one you want, we talk about everybody. We talk about all of them. And I think what you'll find is, whatever your particular religious affiliation is, you'll love seeing the other guys get taken down. But even as you're doing that, you'll realize, this applies to my religion too. Because one of the points I make in the book right off the bat is like, religions, they all seem to be their own little universe, and they have their own language and music and theology and worldview. But when you zoom out and look at their origins and their development, they all start looking to be exactly the same thing.
So do you think that like any of this information should have an effect on like a believer's like faith in their God? Or
here's the thing. When I wrote Nailed, the most common response was, "Oh, that's crazy talk." And then when I wrote Jesus, Mything in Action 7 years later, the most common response was, "Oh yeah, I never thought there was a Jesus." So I'm kind of hoping the same thing happens with this. I think there's a lot more room for like people who are, give side eye to mythicism. They'll appreciate what's coming out in this book and the work of how many historians it is. Because again, I'm just the messenger on this. It's just basically a survey of all the really exciting developments that have come out within the last decades, or even the last years in some cases. And yeah, again, it's only important if your God is important, but it is fascinating, frequently hilarious. And I think I'm really excited about this book in a way I haven't been excited in a long time, because I loved Nailed, I love Jesus, Mything in Action, and this feels like it's building on those, and yet it also feels like it's in a fresh new direction, because I don't think anybody else has written about how all the other religions also seem to have a problematic backstory, and kicking the tires on those biographies. When I set out to write this book, I really didn't expect all of the founder figures to follow the pattern. I'll give an example. Sikhism is barely, it's around 500 years old. It's Johnny come lately compared to the other ones. So I really did not expect it to follow in the pattern. And yet, when I'd start researching it, they began with this series of 10 gurus. But everything we know about the religion seems to have started with guru number 5. and gurus, 1 through 4 seem increasingly mythical, to the point like they're having conversations with giant talking fish and things like that, and their stories aren't being written till, in some cases as late as the 17th century, hundreds of years after the fact. So I was really, by that point, I almost stopped being surprised anymore that the closer you look at any one religion, you see the same patterns occurring, regardless of which one you're talking about. The closer that you get to the source, the less you find, the more it looks allegorical or mythical or just plain made up. The more the historians who specialize in that religion defend their founders with the same arguments that the other religions do, with this suspiciously devout fervence, that, oh yeah, they really existed, maybe, probably, but then they talk about all the other elements that came before them, and you can see the origins just leaching off into other religions that came before it. Because none of these religions that we have, I'm not talking about the oldest religion in the world, I'm talking about the top 10. But those all seem to start around the same time, about 2,500 years ago, more or less, in that time that some historians like to call the axial age, which is sort of a mushy term, but it seems to me that that's what they're really talking about. Is this is a time when you have all these cosmopolitan universal empires where they're trying to reach out and unify an empire of disparate people who have different languages, different cultures, you name it, but you're trying to unite them under a single religion.
Yeah. Now, for volume 2 here, do you spend much time on like the mythicism topic when you're talking about Christianity, or do you?
I mean, I punt a lot to Jesus mything in action, because I've been working on that topic for 20 years, and I feel like in a lot of ways I've said all that needs to be said already on that. So I mostly just focused on just Jesus, just John the Baptist, just the apostles, and just made some arguments on, like, for instance, Paul, how we know Paul was real when Jesus wasn't, whether John the Baptist was real or not, given the pros and cons of that, that kind of thing. So stuff that I didn't necessarily get into too deeply in Jesus mything in action.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I think that it's something that you mentioned at the very beginning, talking about questioning whether or not these individuals existed. Yeah. I think that that's an important exercise in, historical research. Like, I feel like we should have like good reasons to think that, certain things are historical. And it seems like a lot of people just sort of not throw away, but they just sort of hand wave away like a lot of the topics in this area.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm glad this trilogy tackles such a wide swath of subjects, because it's if you think Jesus mythicism sounds a little crazy, I don't think it will sound so crazy when you see the shenanigans that are going on at all the other religions.
Mm-hmm. Now, maybe a little bit harder of a question. Yeah. Is there anything in the New Testament that you think is like a historical event or person or anything like that?
Yeah, it's tricky because, like I say, for instance, Paul was a real person, but everything we love about Paul comes from Luke's version of Paul. So, in essence, I argue we've got 4 different Pauls going on in the New Testament. And the one who is the real one is the one we like the least. Yeah. So it's funny you get these little hybrid chimera characters.
Yeah.
But I also I weigh the evidence for John the Baptist and talk about how if you had to put money down, would you put it on Jesus or John the Baptist being real? And I would say I would put it on John the Baptist being real, and this is why. Though it wouldn't shock me if they were both completely made up either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now there is this big push in our current social climate to really heavily rely on the New Testament being some kind of historically reliable. What do you think about that in the light of, what you've covered in your book here, and just, I guess, maybe in general, how do you feel about, doing that deep coupling between history and this the Christianity as a
Right.
faith?
Right. Well, I'll tell you, because this happened recently. I was asked to review this debate that Bart Ehrman had with a Christian apologist, and the Christian apologist editor framed the whole book. So it was almost like he was debating two people at once. And even though we're supposedly, as mythicists and historicists, completely opposed to each other, it felt like I was reading me debating somebody. We were exactly on the same page when it came to, can we trust the New Testament on the historical Jesus down the line. And I that was actually reassuring to know that historicists and mythicists, I think we agree on more than we disagree, and people aren't really aware of that. And this is the people who take the debate seriously in the first place. And to be honest, I mean, as atheists, it doesn't matter if Jesus was real or not, whether if he's a myth or not, I should say. Either way, Christianity is not suddenly going to make sense if it turned out he was just one more failed apocalyptic prophet. But the thing is, what I love about this debate, not just that it's fascinating, and not that I think because that's the answer. This is where we're barking up the wrong tree. This is where we should be going. But the reason this debate is even worth having is because everything we learn in the back and forth between these two sides helps us better call the bluff of anybody who says, oh yes, Jesus is my best friend, and he knows how you should behave and think and vote, and this is what he told me. We can call their bluff completely, because one thing we can both agree on is that the Gospels are myths, whether there was a real Jesus at the bottom of them or not. And that's at the end of the day, that's why we don't need to be, hurling thunderbolts at each other. We can shake hands and disagree, and it's totally fine. But on the other hand, Christians don't have that freedom to do it. They have to have their Jesus not be a myth, which is a shame, because he is a myth no matter how you slice it. The Jesus of faith is a complete myth.
Now we do have one super chat. We have a couple of super chats to get to at the end, but there's one that's very pertinent to this conversation right now. But before I get to that, since we're talking about Christianity and in our current socioeconomic climate, what do you think about, like, the Christian nationalism getting pushed into more of the public eye, getting pushed onto children, like in cases of Louisiana and Oklahoma? Considering all of the information that's contained in your book here and how ahistorical a lot of it is, how do you feel about seeing, like, all of these new things going down where children are potentially going to be forced to believe in, notably false things?
It's absolutely horrifying, isn't it? It is. And the irony is that they want to make Handmaid's Tale come true for everybody, and yet their guy is basically the Antichrist. There's the irony is just the hypocrisy of it. It's just they don't care, and they're fact proof. That is scary. The fact that some of these people, they don't even crack a Bible. They just know they're Christian because that's their tribe, and bingo. Jesus said it. I said it. God believes it. That settles it. That's their bumper sticker. Yeah.
I find it to be totally scary too. So,
not all Christians are like that. Not all believers of any stripe are like that. And there's a chance that some of them will read this book and come away with a whole different perspective on their religion and everybody else's religion. Because as a Christian, I know what I love to do is talk about how all the other religions were wrong. So I think that part of these books will be irresistible to any Christian, if they're a Christian like I was.
Yeah, I totally think so. Normally there's a particular kind of blind side that comes to, one's own, like, religious beliefs, but they're freely able to. Yeah.
That's how I deconverted. Was I realized I was being just like the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. And boom, just one moment I was a Christian, next minute it was like, whoa, wait a minute, what have I done?
All right, we do have a super chat from Kristen Hood.
Kristen
We yes, we both know
I
Kristen.
love you, Kristen.
Kristen asks, "Love this book. Can David talk about the multiple Yahwehs and Els that
Yes,
exist?"
absolutely. Yeah, I've got a whole section in the Gods of Monotheism where I talk about all the different gods that we can identify that the ancient Israelites and Judeans worshipped. Yeah, there was multiple Els: El Shaddai, El Konkona Adonai, Israel. Um, all these terms for these various gods and various Yahwehs. There's Yahweh of this place, Yahweh of that place. Our Yahweh seems to be the Yahweh of the south, from like Midian, that area. Um,
Mhm.
but there were plenty of them. And Francesca Stavrakopoulos did a great job in her book, God and Anatomy, talking about what that God looked like to the earliest believers.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that I know this was something that I was thinking about earlier, but I know I had the misconception before I looked more into it that Judaism was monotheistic, but it's
Right.
actually more henotheistic. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
And it goes off in other directions. There's a whole century's worth of correspondence from a place called Elephantine in Egypt. And from the 5th century BCE, we've got literally over a century's worth of letters, correspondence, court cases, you name it, in this whole archive. And it blows my mind to see how the Jews in this colony worshipped. For instance, they worshiped a god not named Yahweh, but Yahu, and at least 4 other gods, including a consort of his, possibly more, depending on if these names are different names or different nicknames for the same god, but at least 5 that we can point to.
Hmm.
And these polytheists are not just not heretics, they're on really good terms with the temple in Jerusalem at a time when, according to the Bible, that had been taken care of long ago. There was only the one true temple, and all the other holy places had been taken out. That nope. Here we are, 5th century BCE, and these guys are completely fine with each other. We have them saying things like, "I hope the gods bless you, my brothers," when talking to their fellow Jews in letters. We have letters from the Persian governor telling them, "Hey, here's how you celebrate this holiday, Passover." The Persian governor is telling these Jews how to celebrate this thing. We don't have any trace of Moses, of Joshua, none of those events, none of the names that you see associated with any of those stories appear in that colony. None of the judgments that come from the temple in Jerusalem are based on Mosaic law. They're all just rulings from the judges in the temple in Jerusalem. There is no Judaism in that 5th century. And that was something like, even before I started writing this book, that always bugged me. And I thought, well, I guess these are just some kind of mutant spinoff. They went off and went their own way. But it's like, it bugged me because, well, no, they're in cahoots with the temple. They love each other. They have no problem with each other. And that's when a couple years ago, Derek Lambert said, "Hey, have you heard about Russell Gummerkin?" And I turned into his show, and sure enough, within 2 minutes, he was talking about the Elephantine Papyri and saying, "Yeah, it's true. There was no Judaism. There was no Moses in the 5th century BC."
Hmm.
So that, I mean, again, it's just bombshell after bombshell. And just everything we know about Judean history is just an illusion until about the 7th century. When they come back from Babylonian exile, that's really when Judaism starts to start. And it really doesn't get going until like the 2nd or 3rd century BCE, under the Hasmoneans, the same dynasty that brought us Herod. That seems to be the empire that, well, not the empire, but that's the political structure that gave us Judaism.
Yeah. So I know that some people might interpret this, different ways, but are you saying that Judaism didn't exist prior to the 2nd or 3rd century BCE, or what are you saying?
Well, Judaism as we know it, in my humble opinion, based on what scholars are saying, I don't see how you can defend saying that there was any such thing as our Judaism. There was no Moses until the 4th century, and that was a Greek Moses. Our Moses doesn't show up until the 3rd century in response to these earlier versions of Moses. So you can't have Mosaic law. Even the idea of having 12 tribes comes from Plato. That idea came from the Hellenistic world. And this is the thing that really blows my mind, is how we've got the books on paper that point to this, that the argument is so strong. It's really undeniable that Judaism is so much younger than we think. And our history, our idea of how things unfolded in Israel and in Judea is based on nothing. It's just based on wishful thinking and myth making.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, to get more specific information, if you're listening to this and you're wondering what that evidence is, it's all covered in volume 2 of Playing God,
and the bibliography is like, if you want to know more, there's constant references to go to this book, go to these books, go to this book.
Definitely. I was very impressed with all of the references that you had, like at the end of chapters, and like you know, you've got the superscript reference numbers, everything, everywhere, all over every chapter. Every page of the book is covered with references. So but the bibliography, I can only imagine, is worth what you would spend you know, for all 3 books.
Yeah. Honestly, Richard Carrier says the bibliography alone is worth the price of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know that's what I value a lot, like with your mything and action books, but as well as these books, which we don't have a physical copy yet, but that's just because we're really crossing our fingers hoping to get a signed copy.
They're getting there. They're getting there.
Yeah.
As soon as I get mine, I will send them out.
Yeah. I know.
In fact, that's supposed to be happening next week, sometime next week.
Okay, awesome.
First batch. Yeah.
Awesome. I do have all 3 books linked in the description. There's a section describing each book, and then a link that you can use to go to Amazon and actually pick the books up. Now, they're not available in Kindle yet, which I was a little disappointed by, but
that is also should be in 3 days. I'm told that's going to get sorted out. So next week is when a lot of things are happening. People have been asking about the audiobook. It looks like I will be able to record that in September, at some point in September. So stay tuned for that.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. And I got to say, I just got done editing an audiobook, and whew, that is an intense process. Not only the recording of it, but the editing of it too. So I do not envy you in September.
Well, yeah.
So all of that covered where they can find the books and everything like that. We're going to head into volume 3, which is actually something that I don't really know all that much about. So the volume 3 is actually where you know, you're going to have a leg up, like in the information department, because you're in volume 3, you're covering Islam as well as a whole bunch of other religions,
all the Eastern religions, all the major Eastern religions today, I should say.
Right.
Yeah. This isn't an exhaustive look into all religions, but it really goes deep into the top 10 or so, and a bunch of bonus religions too at the end. And one thing I haven't know if I've mentioned it yet, but Zoroastrianism is this Persian religion that began, you know, several thousand years ago, probably 3,000 years ago, and went through various incarnations. But at some point, the Persian Empire picked it up and kind of rebooted it the way religions get rebooted, into Zoroastrianism, which was the Persian Empire's religion. And if it weren't for Zoroastrianism, we would not have Judaism. We would not have Christianity. We would not have Islam. Because not only was it the direct ancestor of all 3 of those, but each one individually also took ideas straight from Zoroastrianism into their own religion in different ways. What's amazing to me, and again, if you asked me 3 years ago, I wouldn't have known any of this stuff. It would have shocked me to the core. Zoroastrianism also appears to be the origin point for the Eastern religions, Buddhism and Brahmanism, which led to Hinduism. I always thought like Hinduism or Jainism were the oldest religions in the world. And in some sense, they may go back, 1,000 years or so more. But for sure, we can know that we can trace there's this split, and it's like, again, these aren't the oldest religions in the world. There were other ones before, but Zoroastrianism turns out to be like the mitochondrial Eve. It was the oldest living relative of everyone who's alive today. All our religions that we have today, the top 10 biggies, all seem to stem from this religion that came from Persia and the Aryan steppes and Central Eurasia. And we see the split, and the reaction to it created Buddhism over here, Brahmanism over here, and Western religions over there. Blows my mind.
Yeah. Jesus Tales has an interesting question. What are the earliest hard copy texts of Zoroastrianism?
That's a great question. It's multiply great, actually. The oldest levels of Zoroastrian texts are what's called the Gathas, and they are meant to go all the way back to the prophet Zarathustra or Zoroaster. Here's the thing, though. We don't have the originals. Wah, wah. And they don't appear to be written by a single guy. So most of Zoroastrianism comes from later scriptures that came after that. But as if you take a deep dive into those, it gets really problematic really fast. And what supposedly is the single writings of a single prophet who was inspired by all this by a giant 20-foot tall angel don't look like they were written that they look like they were liturgical writings from a group from an older religion. So yeah.
Well, so what do scholars date like the Zoroastrian like religion as, like either originating or at least the earliest that we can place it?
Yeah, these are tricky questions because especially when you talk about the Eastern religions, it's super hard to tell what years we're talking about. I mean, like for instance, pinpointing Buddha's life, it's a range of hundreds of years, depending on whether you're talking about the Chinese, the Tibetans, the Japanese, the Indians. They all have different ideas, and all the different Buddhist sects have different ideas of when Buddha lived and who his contemporaries were. Same with Zoroaster. We really don't know exactly where or when he lived, if he lived. I don't think he lived. But yeah, tracking it down, it's just crazy messed up. Yeah, it's a still open question. And they're still debating that evolution of Aryan ideas down into India. But again, it's worth watching that debate because everything we've learned in the last few decades just shows that, yeah, we're in the right direction looking here, that there's some really interesting things going on here.
What would you say to somebody, because I've gotten this pushback before, what would you say to somebody that said that there's no connection between Zoroastrianism and like Christianity or Judaism, or like there's no evidence of influence there?
That's adorable. It's like, where? Yeah. It's adorable. How do you deny that? The afterlife itself was a Persian. When Jesus says would be together in paradise, paradise is a Persian word. The Pharisees were Persian, named after the Persians. It's all over the place. No serious scholars would ever make something like that. That's an apologetic argument, but it's not based on anything factual.
Yeah, and I mean, even I guess even getting worse, as far as apologetics goes, I've also been hit with the whole, well, these later religions actually used ideas novel to Christianity in order to create their information.
Well, what I love is when apologists say, oh, well, God used the Babylonians to give these, they treated it like it was science and they were just learning this new thing about God from these other guys. That's adorable. And also, I meant to say, in the book, I talk about the things that were directly borrowed from each of these religions through Zoroastrianism. So when you read the book, you'll be able to say, well, what about this, and this, and just go down the line.
Yeah, so it sounds like people would just be able to pick up. I guess that would have to be volume 2, or do you discuss that in volume?
That'd be
3?
volume 2, but volume 1 also gets into that. What Kristen was asking about, all the different gods of
right.
ancient Israel and Judea.
Yeah. So if anybody out there has questions like what I'm trying to ask here, as far as what I have experienced, you can definitely find more specific answers in the book. But so my next question is, what's the most interesting like religion you cover in volume 3? Either interesting in their like origin story, or interesting as in like how they're constructed, like just interesting in general.
Well, I think the biggest surprise for me when I was studying the Eastern religions was how incestuous they are, how they all seem to stem from either Brahmanism or Buddhism, to the extent that Confucius and Lao Tzu and uh, Taoism, I'm blanking on all the other ones, they all seem to be directly spun off from Buddha, from the Buddha. That their founder figures are actually pseudonyms of the Buddha, is what I'm trying to say. And that surprised me. It surprised me that Jainism is both, may go back to these ancient archaeological sites in India, but they may not. They may just have some passing similarities, because most of the Jain scholars who are very pro-Jain, they think that Buddhism is actually older than Jainism and Hinduism, and that surprised me. There's a great book called Greek Buddha by Beckwith, who talks about that. But I have to say, in book 3, the thing that really blew me away was reading, especially from 2 scholars, Sean Anthony and Stephen Shoemaker, who are just blowing the roof off of the origins of Islam and Muhammad himself, and just pointing out that for like the first 50 years of Islam, we don't have Muhammad. There is no Muhammad. The archaeological evidence, the textual evidence we have for him is really interesting. It's like, yeah, there's a Muhammad, but he's not a prophet. He's not a religious figure. He's, there was a war chief over here. And he may have been Muhammad. Maybe his name's not Muhammad. This may have even been his title, So, it gets multiply problematic really fast. And I always said I would never write a book criticizing Islam or Scientology until I had a better security budget. In book 3, I talk about them both, and so yeah, it's been nice knowing everybody. But if they put a fatwa out on me, at least the books will survive. So don't tell my wife.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you'll probably be secure, but who knows? I've personally gotten a lot of threats from Muslims and stuff, just for not believing in their God.
I mean, honestly, I'm more scared of Christian nationalists, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah.
So as far as like as I guess the Muhammad mythicism, do you extensively cover that in this? Because I know that's kind of an area I'm pretty weak in. When people ask me about whether or not Muhammad existed, I'm like, I don't really know. I haven't looked into it.
Yeah, it's really worth reading, and I've tried to keep it as accessible as I can for all these topics. I mean, that's what I try to do in all my books, is to take these big, chunky historical topics and break them down without making them stupid, without watering them down,
right?
And keeping that balance. But it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. Just on a purely historical, not theological, not anything, just on a purely historical effort, there's just no way Islam is what it says it is about itself. Mecca, Medina, early Islam, the first, what they call the fitnas, the civil wars between Muslims. We don't really get Islam as we know it until not the first dynasty, the righteously guided dynasty, but the Umayyads, and then later the Abbasids. It's not until that middle dynasty, the Umayyads, that we start getting what we think of as Islam. All the tropes and all the typical features of it don't show up until about a couple generations after Muhammad was supposed to have been alive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A question very on point for this volume 3. The Mayanist Mind is asking, what scholars of Buddhism do you rely on?
The Mahayanist mind. Yeah, I
Oh, sorry.
David Drews is probably one of the main ones. John Kingsley is has encapsulated a lot of David Drews' work. Bernard Favre, I believe his name is, from he's a Buddhist, practicing Buddhist and a Buddhist scholar, and any number of other Buddhists whose names are eluding me that came to me and said, "Yeah, we're having these debates in our circles, and this is why." Boom, 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 boom. And when they start, and I also in the course of laying these all out, I also worked on a lot of devout Buddhist scholars whose names are eluding me at the moment, but they're all in the book, and just taking what they say in all innocence and just using it against them, judo style, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And again, I don't
so
mean to be. I'm not trying to do a hatchet job on the religions. I actually have there's a lot about Buddhism I like, and one of my best friends up here is a very Buddhist atheist or atheist Buddhist, and it's not necessarily those two concepts are not necessarily exclusive, but I think you'll appreciate the problematic nature, the mythological nature of the Buddha.
Mhm. Well, so I don't really know all that much about Buddhism or any of the Eastern religions really, but I know that Buddhism, I believe, has like almost two sides of it. Is there a more secular side of it,
It
and
can
then
be,
a more
yeah,
spiritual
it can
side?
be. I mean, it's sort of famous for not having gods at all, and for teachings like if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him, or the finger that points to the moon is not the moon. There's a lot of really cool ideas and concepts in Buddhism. What I guess my whole point is not that these things are necessarily good or bad, because I think you make arguments both ways for all of them, but pointing out that they're all human. People made these and they continue to make them. And as the evolution continues, everyone is part of this process, even us, the heretics and the atheists. That's how evolution works. It doesn't stop, and it creates all these different amazing things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you think that the dubious nature of their historical claims and everything like that, do you think that that should have an effect on like what truths or how a person should feel about any particular religion that you cover in these 3 books?
I mean, the whole book is a big hashtag just saying from me. It's like I'm not you do with this information what you want, but I want you to know this is where these things came from. And every yeah, I mean the title is called Playing God for a reason, because sooner or later you scratch a god, you'll find people underneath
Mhm.
that. Pay no attention to the scribes behind the curtain here writing down these scriptures. Um, yeah.
I
And
don't know. To me, the title "Playing God" kind of just, at least for me, it communicates how humans seem to be playing God
for
with,
sure.
representing themselves as God or
Yeah,
claiming to get messages from God or be
absolutely.
representing God, when in actuality, it's more or less seems like people are just not necessarily making stuff up as if like they're lying to people like
Right.
knowingly, but like
But they are in a sense. They're if at best they're lying to themselves.
Mhm,
Um, but it's funny because there's such. I mean, we could debate that all day long. Pick a religion and how honest were they? How sincere were they? How self-aware were they? And I don't even know if the individual practitioners who created their scriptures might have known. It's
mhm.
it's it's so hard to tell because on the one hand, it's so obviously made up in every case, and on the other hand, it's like, well, why was it made up? Were any of them, do all our lies become truths in the end because they created this beautiful religion or something? I think what I'd like to see is that when we realize that all our religions are human, Um, they're human constructions. It means they're not above criticism. It means we can take the good from them and leave the bad. And we don't have to take any one of them very seriously. And I think that's important. I think that's a good takeaway.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so too, because there are so many people in this day and age that put such a heavy emphasis on like what an old book says, and I get so frustrated with people that are just so helplessly dependent upon the exact words in a book rather than, I guess, looking past it and instead of adhering strictly to those words. You know, it's very frustrating for me.
And it's also frustrating, like the people who need to read this book don't want to read a book like this. The people who want to read this book maybe don't need to read a book like this. It seems really churlish for an atheist to point out how religion is not true. It just seems so obvious, clunkily, thuddingly, boringly obvious. And yet I love this book because it's so fascinating to see how this process unfolds. And for people who I love that quote about religion tends to make good people better and bad people worse. You can argue that, but I think the point is like the people who are good because of their religion, this book won't hurt them. The people who are bad because of this religion, if they bother to engage with it at all, it might turn their lives around. That might be a good thing. So
yeah, I think so too. We are about to get to the super chats. We do have a few to get to that we didn't already cover. If you would like to ask David a question about either playing God or any of his other books, please feel free to send in a super chat. I mean, we'll answer any super chats of any amount. So just feel free to send one in and we'll get to you. Are you ready to cover the super chats or let me actually ask you, was there anything that we didn't cover that you really want to point out and let people know about your books?
No, I think we're good. Well, one thing, if you want to get an autographed copy from me, I'm happy to sell them directly. You can shoot me an email at everybodylovesdave@gmail.com, or you can find me on Facebook, and I'm very happy to do that for you. And it might even work out cheaper than Amazon. I'm not sure, but yeah. But,
do you want me to include your Gmail like in the description so that people can email you? Or
maybe not throw it out there too widely, but if anyone asks you, feel free to give them my contact info. Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Like I just did on with my own. Yeah.
If anybody is interested in getting David's book like directly from him, you can shoot me an email, john@godlessengineering.com. I'll have that in the description, and I'll make sure that you get David's relative information there.
I couldn't remember if you actually go by John, by your real name on this channel or not. So I was like really biting my tongue from saying John. So I'm glad you said that.
Oh yeah, everybody knows my name. I go by John everywhere. It's a totally like very I guess watered down like there's so many Johns that exist out there. All right, so first up we got Michael Beverly who says, David, John, there was a good stream with Chrissy and Camel, 4 hours, the entire stream is 4 hours. They make a convincing case that there was a guy who was mythologized. What are your thoughts? Well, I don't know. Have you seen that 4-hour marathon yet?
I have not. I'd be happy to see it or at least get a gist of it. Well, here's one thing I do want to say. There's nothing implausible about Jesus being a real guy or Jesus being a amalgamation of several guys. There's all kinds of different historical recreations of Jesus, and most of them are plausible. Some of them are crazy and not, but most of them are perfectly plausible. It's just that I don't think they hold up to scrutiny. It looks like we're going a different direction, and the same is true of all the other founder figures. But yeah, shoot me the information, because one thing, if I'm wrong about this, I want to know. It's like, if you've got evidence that says, oh, Dave is completely wrong about this, and here's why, give it to me. If you convince me, I'm going to write a book about that. I would feel honor bound to write a book about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I haven't watched the entire stream yet. I have started it. It doesn't exactly start off well. Camel actually misrepresents like Dr. Carrier's credentials and what he's actually doctored in, or he had degreed in. Sorry, that's what I was looking for.
It's already not off to a good start, as you say.
Right. Yeah.
I find that usually the case when I get somebody come up to me and say, "Oh yeah, well you're wrong, and this is why." It's like, no. I mean, hey, I could be wrong. All the historians I rely on could be wrong. I mean, almost all of them are certainly wrong about something. I'm sure there's things I've said that are wrong about even this subject. But on the whole, yeah, it doesn't seem like I'm too far off the mark, and all these other people as well. Yeah.
No.
You put them all together. I feel like it's hard to argue with.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm planning on watching the stream, and if I can find enough good things to bring up, I'll probably have Carrier on to go over it. Yeah, because they name drop Carrier as if this is a response to Carrier or something like that. I know one of the arguments, the primary argument, is stating somehow like all of the supposed or all of the mystery religion, like all of their saviors, apparently were thought up or existed or came about like in the 10th century BCE or something like that. And like, yeah. I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, I haven't actually watched all of it yet, so I'm interested to hear what this argument is. But from what I know, Carrier's thoroughly like covered like a lot of this information. Like,
and this is the thing, I have a lot more patience with someone who disagrees with me when they have actually read the book and and they come back to me. You said this here on this page or whatever. This is why I think that's wrong. So much more patience with that than just. Now I haven't read anything by you or Carrier or Robert Price, but blah 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 blah. Yeah.
No, I
really fast.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I told David Michael in the comments that I read like the actual comments underneath the video, and it seemed like a lot of them were very displeased with the information presented.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in reviewing it for myself, and hopefully I can find enough meat there to get Carrier on, or at least justify getting Carrier on. So that'll be interesting.
I've got to say, one thing I'm super grateful for is that whether it's just timing or the fact that there's so many people out now talking about mythicism, the fact that just about anybody off the street can hear some video and immediately push back and say, well, that's not true. That's not true. That's not true. That's something that wasn't available when I first started looking into this whole thing. So mythicism is not going to go away. Maybe sometime down the line, they'll have some evidence that it doesn't hold up. But so far, it's not the case. And it's kind of like evolution was in the Victorian age. It's like, oh, no, this is horrible and this is wrong. And yet it just never goes away because they either ignore the arguments, make fun of the arguments, straw man the arguments, but they never engage with the arguments. And when they do, they realize that they're standing on sandier ground than they think. And there's Philip Davies was a historicist. The late great Philip Davies did so much work on the Old Testament and our knowledge of Israel and Judah. He had a great review of Bart Ehrman's book, Did Jesus Exist?, where he points out that, look, I'm a historicist. Sure, I think there was a Jesus, but why are we treating this like a pariah? In any other field of history, this wouldn't even be controversial. And yet we're acting like this is blasphemy to even weigh the thin reed of history or of historical evidence for Jesus. If you can find it, it's his review of Did Jesus Exist? Perfectly worth reading. And it's so spot on. So spot on.
Definitely. Let's see. Moving on with our super chats here. We got Michael Beverly who says, any chance of more in KU for us poor Mexicans? I'm not exactly sure what that means. Maybe Michael can, I guess, clarify what he means by KU.
Yeah.
But thanks for the 20, I believe that's Mexican pesos.
No. Yes.
Kindle Unlimited.
Oh, Kindle Unlimited. In Spanish, you mean, or in English? It sounds like it's a question about Amazon, and I'm not sure how to answer that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, he's in the chat right now, so I can clarify as soon as you. No, in English. So I guess English
Gotcha.
On Kindle Unlimited.
Gotcha. That said, I would absolutely love to have a Spanish translation of my books. I was lucky enough to get a Portuguese translator, but if you know a good Spanish translator, let's talk, because that would be a joy to me.
And then we've got,
I would absolutely love that.
I'm only on, like, I don't know, like subject 3 of my Duolingo for Spanish, so I'm definitely not the person to talk to about that. Next is Jesus Tales, who says Jesus is implausible since 90% of Jesus of Nazareth comes from Jesus, son of Nun, Jesus, son of Jehozadak, and Elushua El Saves. Very implausible. What do you think about the idea that Jesus existing primarily based on, like, just his name and what his name means?
It's extremely fishy just based on that kind of thing alone. But I mean, when you get to the fact that all our biographical information for Jesus relies on the 4 Gospels, and the 4 Gospels all seem to rely on the first Gospel, Mark's, quote unquote Mark, we call it that, and Christianity seems so different before that Gospel is written, and everything in that Gospel seems to be an allegory from start to finish. Things that make no sense historically, like his trial and execution, make perfect sense as an allegory. The fact that you've got the synoptic Gospels over here and John's Gospels telling supposedly the same story and yet telling completely incompatible stories. This all seems to me that, if nothing else, the Jesus of faith is completely based on nothing that was real. But like any other figure, and I do talk about other non-religious figures that also turned out to be completely mythical in history. When you have somebody who's like half real, like Paul, there's usually some leftover evidence that you can point to and say, well, that's clearly the real Paul. We don't have that with Jesus. We don't have that with Moses. We don't have that with Muhammad. We don't have that with Buddha. What little we have points to somebody completely different.
Yeah, would you say that primarily the evidence as far as like the historicity of Jesus really kind of hinges on like Paul's work and how we interpret Paul?
I mean, it has to, because we got nothing else. We really don't have anything outside of early Christian writings, and they're, again, depending on who's doing the talking, they paint a very different picture of Christianity. You've got Paul talking about all these other rival Jesuses that are being preached by these rival apostles. He's talking about a figure that wasn't on earth. The few times where you point at something and says, oh, well, here he must be referring to a real Jesus because he says this over here. It's usually in the context of something very allegorical. And he says something like, he was born of a woman. Checkmate, atheist. It's like, yeah, who talks like that? You're already talking about a demigod. I think the one hook they can even come close to hanging their hook on is if you call James the brother of Jesus instead of the brother of the Lord, and that the brother of the Lord is not a sect title. But it's like, of all the things that go wrong in the Gospels, to point at this one ambiguous thing and say, well, that's proof positive. Ignore all that other stuff over there, like a few verses later where he treats the Jerusalem church leaders like they're false Christians, and he hates them, and he disagrees with them for the rest of Galatians. Ignore the fact that when he talks about the hierarchy of the church, disciples of Jesus aren't in it. The family of Jesus isn't in it. In fact, he never uses the word disciples once ever in any context referring to anybody. And yeah, we could go on all day about that. And it's like, yeah, why doesn't he say this here if this was true? Why does he say this here if this was true? There's just so many weirdness in early Christianity if there was a real Jesus. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I totally. We're both on the same page as far as all that goes.
Right. I know you know all this. Yeah.
Yeah. Limited Light says, "Gee, did you see the comment I posted on the presentation video?" I'm guessing Limited Light's talking about on the Myth Vision presentation. I haven't really taken a lot of time to look at all of the comments. There's like nearly 900 comments on it so far. So, but I'll definitely look for you there, Limited Light. Thank you for sending in that super chat. And then finally, Michael Beverly wanted to clarify books 2 and 4 are on Kindle Unlimited. I guess of the Western,
The Complete Heretic's Guide to Western Religion.
Right.
Gotcha. I don't know a lot about Kindle Unlimited, so I'm not sure. It's if they're on there or off there, it's nothing I had to do with it. I'm not sure how that gets sorted out, but I think I'll have to look at that. But what a weird thing that book 2 and 4 are, and not any of the rest of them.
Yeah,
I think that is.
We had one come right in. The I'm gonna mispronounce this. Mahayanist. Is that how you pronounce it?
If I'm saying that right, it's Mahayanist. Yeah.
Mahayanist.
Mahayana Buddhism. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What does Fitzgerald think of Gombrich, who says that there's no doubt that the Pali literature goes back to the Buddha, a single genius? He says,
if I had a nickel for every religious scholar who said that Zoroaster or Moses or all of them, there's no doubt that this was the work of a single mind genius. Yeah, they all say that about all of them. And yeah, that's what I was referring to when I talk about how they'll talk about how this thing is completely wrong, and then they'll run back and touch the totem and say, oh, but there really was, of course, a fill in the blank.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I guess trying to play devil's advocate a little bit here, like I know that we would say, well, there's we have good archaeological evidence for, let's say, Pilate or a number of other historical figures in the past. How would you contrast that with things like these religious figures?
Yeah, well, especially for Buddha, we have nothing, absolutely nothing in the entire realm of Eastern religion until like the 2nd or 3rd century. I'll have to pin down exactly when that is, but yeah, we have nothing for somebody like Gombrich to base that on. Yeah, absolutely nothing. And even scholars who I respect, like Karen Armstrong, she will pull the same thing where she tries to get into the psychology of figures like you name it. I mean, she talks about everybody and gets in their heads. And when she does, she'll usually like cite something in scriptures, and I'm the kind of asshole that has to go in and look in and see, does it say what she says it is? No, it doesn't always. Sometimes it says something remotely unlike what she's claiming this guy is thinking, and she's basing that on this particular scripture, which may or may not have even go back to the era of that particular individual. Yeah. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. I would say that's one of the patterns you see in religious studies is they defend the subject of their particular religion, not necessarily their religion, but their area of focus. They want them to be real, and they want to feel like they've got a good window into their mind. And I think it offends them and shocks them that their object of study may be the work of several people over hundreds of years.
Yeah, that particular cognitive dissonance can be tough to break through on occasion, depending on how tied you are to the religious faith.
Yeah. And to be fair, these are scholars who spend their whole life, their whole career, all their area of study, studying this one thing or related group of things. And the fact that it could just be made up much longer, I mean, it would ruin their lives. I kind of get it, how they're in denial about that. It's what was like religious leaders. The Mormon church, there's no way in hell that all the upper muckety mucks can really believe that it's true. There's just no way. And I would love to magically know where that level is when it's like, yeah, but I like it because it's a family business, But after the Mormon murders case in the 80s, when the Mormon leadership was getting played like a fiddle by this forger who was creating fake Mormon artifacts that showed the church was a fake, and they would buy them up and throw them in their archives as fast as they could. yeah, there's no way any of those guys did not know that their church was completely made up. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I'd be willing to bet that's true across the board. Across the board.
I bet so. Then we've got Mark Rothenbuehler, who says, I always appreciate John and David. Great stuff. Thanks.
Thank you so much,
Sorry.
Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'm sorry if I butchered your last name. I'm horrible at pronouncing things. And then finally, we've got Jesus Tales, who says it's really the events of the earlier Jesuses, killing the king of Jerusalem, hanging him on a tree, putting his body in a cave, covering that cave with rocks, which remain to this day. Dozens of examples.
And I'll dovetail on that. You could say the same thing about David and Solomon, Joshua, Gideon, all the big, there's so much, what do they call those in Kipling? Just so stories, where it's like, and we see these rocks to this very day. You know, even Matthew does it in the Gospels. You know, he's talking to John the Baptist, and then he has Jesus say, "From the days of John the Baptist until today," and he literally was just got done talking to him in the Gospel, and saying things like, "And the Jews believe the story to this very day." It's like, yeah.
That sounds like a Donald Trump speech,
right? Yeah.
And he said, "Sir, I believe this to this day."
Tears in his eyes, a big Roman centurion. Yeah, big guy.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for coming on and talking to us about your new books. I can't wait to continue to dive into all three of them. Do you want to tell everybody like where they can find you and what they can, or you know what else you got going on?
Yeah. Well, what else is going on? I'm working on more fiction books. If there's any science fiction fans out there, between my wife and I, we've written several books that I think a lot of atheists will have fun with. The Time Shards trilogy, the Lilith trilogy, the Ashley Parker Plague Town, Plague Nation, Plague World trilogy. If you like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if you like Jim Butcher, this kind of thing where there's mythological elements going on in a very fun urban way. Those books are really great. Time Shards I love because it's a big post-apocalyptic and yet a time travel novel as well. And so you get all kinds of, basically any character you like out of history can show up, including in book 3, Mormon, Porter Rockwell, ancient Celts, Egyptians, Victorian, World War II commandos, robots from the future, dinosaurs. It's all in there. It's super fun. Super fun.
Interesting. Yeah, and aren't you? I do believe that you're on Matt Dillahunty's show, The Hang Up, next week, right?
I will be. Yeah, that's coming up soon. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you, David, for talking to us about your books today. I hope that everybody will at least check out the books in the description. And don't forget to email me if you want to get the books directly from David himself. It's john@godlessengineering.com. I will make sure that you guys can get in touch with him. We got a late member chat, Margaret DeVelden, who says got here late and going right back to the start. I definitely think that would be a good idea because we covered so much in tonight's live stream, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday. I mean, it's a pretty big ask, a Saturday. I mean, you work on a Saturday.
Well, the funny thing is we're working on a book that's due on July 31st, so every day is work day this month. Until we get that.
I know how that feels.
Yeah. But it's been a blast, and I love talking to you. It's so great to see you. Give my love to Mrs. Godless Engineer. And
yeah.
Will we be seeing you guys at BajaCon in August?
I don't think so. That's all the way up in Canada, right?
It is. Well, I mean, it's just this side of Canada. It's very, very close. If you guys get a chance to go to it, it's amazing, and the lineup is stellar.
I've seen the lineup, and I've been meaning to actually put like a promo on the community tab and everything, trying to get everybody to go there. But I don't know. KC, she just said over there, it's only 12 hours away. So I mean, I guess we could do a road trip.
I was gonna say, if you can fly to Detroit, you're almost there. So it's really is closer than you think. Yeah.
All right.
And
I
it's
don't know. I'll
super
I'll
fun.
see if I can convince KC to go. I think I gotta fill out papers for work and everything, but we'll see about it. Anyways, it was good talking to you, David. I hope that you have a lovely night. Don't work too hard, and I guess we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. All right, John. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye, heathens.